This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. I must say, I had never heard the term mimetic desire before today. Well, before this interview. Because the idea of why we want what we want, think about it. Why do we want what we want? That must come from somewhere. What is driving us psychologically to want whatever? We often don't want things independently. Our desire is mimetic. We imitate what other people want. It affects how we choose partners, friends, careers, clothes, vacations, wherever. It's responsible for the formation of our identity. Now, the key is, how can you use this knowledge of ourself and others to better navigate the world for every advantage that we could possibly want? Because it is possible to be more in control of the things that we want, to get away from the trends and the bubbles. Now, don't get me wrong, as a trend following guy, I want to follow those trends, but not mindlessly, with a plan. Nobody wants to be the back end of a bubble blowing up. That's no fun. So how can you get a better handle on your desire and better take control of it? Hell, to benefit your life over the course of your life. My guest today, Luke Burgis, goes down that path. His new book, Wanting: The Power of Mimetic Desire in Everyday Life. I'm so lucky to do this podcast. So many smart people that spend their life researching narrow niche topics that I can learn from, that you guys can learn from. That's what it's all about. Learning something that we don't know. Let us learn from somebody who spends all of their time to master it, to give us the crib notes, because we don't have enough time in our lifetime to learn everything through our own experience. With all that said and my mini rant over, let's jump right into my conversation today with Luke Burgis and touch on and talk about the power of mimetic desire. I want to pretend you and I are at a coffee shop. And I'm a little frustrated. I'm a little agitated. I'm looking at my home country from 8,000 miles away. I'm saying to myself, and I'm actually having this conversation with notable Americans outside of America. We're looking and we're observing and we're saying to ourselves, cancel culture, identity politics, gender issues that perhaps have jumped the shark, so to speak. I mean, 30, 50, 100 genders. People that are looking towards leaders directly for money. Just give me something. I keep saying to myself as an outside observer, this doesn't work in the long run. This breaks down. This doesn't keep functioning. We weren't this at one point in time, and we have become this. It's messy as hell. Again, you and I are just at a coffee shop. I'm not even asking you to get into your niche yet, your content, your book. We're going to get there. Where am I wrong, Luke? We're at the coffee shop. I don't know you. Am I completely crazy?
Well, I don't think you're crazy at all. It's kind of cool talking to somebody who's outside of the US right now, because I think that makes you a little anti-mimetic in that you can see things that we can't see in the US. It's one of the reasons I like to read foreign newspapers, so I can actually get a somewhat objective perspective from people that aren't blinded by some of the stuff going on. Look, Michael, I mean, I think the mimesis, and we're going to get into my book a little bit later, I think it's the most powerful explanation for some of the crazy shit we see going on in the country right now. And it's people reacting to other people through this process of imitation. And you have to wonder who's going to be the scapegoat when this is all said and done. Who's going to be the scapegoat when the market crashes? Who's going to be the scapegoat when everything isn't rosy for the next 3.5, 4 years? I mean, I can only imagine what 2024 is going to be like. So you're not crazy. I don't know if this coffee shop is in Vietnam or if it's in Washington, D.C., where I'm based, but it probably makes a difference because it's hard for us to see what's actually happening when we're inside of it. It's interesting to be talking to you right now, being outside of the country. We don't know what we don't know, as Donald Rumsfeld once said. So I certainly know that I have blind spots, but from where I stand, we're not in a good spot. You've got most Americans, I think a majority of Americans think that capitalism is broken. People have lost sight of what they're even fighting for. The object of our desire has been lost, and the only thing that we can focus on or see is our rival, whoever that might be.
In the markets, in futures markets, things are absolutely zero sum. As we just recently watched this GameStop situation, I mean, there was definitely some people that jumped in, got burned, and that money transferred exactly to somebody else. There's no doubt about it. I mean, so in the markets, you do have some zero sum activity. You make a good point that when it comes to society, if we're at a point, as an outsider these days looking at it, if we're at a point where it's like, I can only get ahead if you are eliminated, you personally are eliminated. And that's what it feels like what's going on in America. That's a brutal, nihilistic, just doesn't work situation. There's going to be a major breakdown. I can't put a time on it, but if people literally believe that one side is evil, the other side must be eliminated, and I do tend to think, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, I do tend to think this is not necessarily because people in politics sometimes love to make this as an equal situation. I'm not convinced it's equal. For example, social media is not controlled by an equal middle of the road political situation. It's definitely to one side. It's a really nauseous feeling that I have right now, where we end with this, where we head with this. And as you point out, it's all about looking at our neighbor. What's our neighbor think? Where are the people that are looking inside themselves and saying intrinsically, what do I want? Does that even exist anymore?
I think that there are intrinsic wants. I do believe that. We're definitely in a bear market for introspection. I mean, it's practically non-existent in most circles. People are simply not able to see their own role in some of these mechanisms. I'm sure we'll get into mimesis and probably talk a little bit about the markets. I do find mimetic desire just running totally rampant.
Let me stop you there because you're jumping in,
Sure.
and that's fine. When you say mimetic desire, I can tell you right now before this call, and I guess I feel stupid because a lot of the people that are floating in your world, I see their work and whatnot. I was not familiar with this term. So why don't you define it from the top so people understand what mimetic desire is?
I read Trend Following over these last few weeks. I think this concept belongs in that behavior chapter in that book because it's another tool, it's another mental model just to understand human behavior. Forget the desire part of the word. Let's just start with mimesis. What does mimesis mean? It's really a fancy word for imitation. So mimetic desire means that we don't desire any object, whether that object is a stock or a woman or a man or a career, due to its objective qualities itself, no matter how much we might want to convince ourselves, due to a third person, a model that models the desire for that thing for us. And we usually don't realize the role that the model plays in our desire for that thing. I'll give you an example. Over the last 6, 7, 8 months, as I teach at the Catholic University of America in DC, I have had numerous philosophy, theology, literature students come to me and ask me to help them buy Bitcoin, US equities, even GameStop. I guarantee you, I mean, these are people that have never bought a stock in their lives. They've never even thought about it. The thought has never even crossed their mind. They didn't get the idea or the desire to enter the market. Now, I'm not saying it's good or bad. This desire did not come from them waking up in the morning and deciding that it's just a smart thing to do. I'm going to get in the market. I'm going to make some money. That desire came most likely, I mean, in all the cases that I'm thinking of right now, came because one of them had a friend or somebody that they know, maybe even through 2 or 3 degrees of separation, that made a little bit of money over the last 12 months. It's not hard to do. You don't have to be smart to have made money over the last year. And that's where that desire came from. They didn't roll out of bed with it. So it's almost entirely mimetic in that sense. And this happens all the time. I mean, it happens when it comes to romantic interests, when it comes to the desires to vacation in certain spots. I think some people are more mimetic than others. This idea of mimetic desire is the idea that a lot of the reasons why we want the things that we want comes from imitating other people who are models of desire for that thing.
It is a great way to think because once you accept where you're going, it's like a secret decoder ring, so to speak, for observing almost everything around us, including ourselves. What are our motivations? Why do we want something? Why does somebody else want something? And when you realize it's this copycat behavior, boom, you're off to the races. By the way, just to quickly interject, I did go to O'Connell High School in Arlington, Virginia, right down the road from you.
Right down the road, yeah. So I've only been in DC for a few years. I'm right in the district, man. I'm in Columbia Heights, so I don't make it to Arlington a lot.
A long time ago, I remember a Catholic university baseball coach was like, come play baseball for us. And I was like, no, I'm going somewhere else. Anyways, give me some background here. Who's the grandfather? I know there is a particular individual. I'm not familiar with him either. Is he alive or dead?
He's dead. He died in 2015. Rene Girard is the grandfather of this concept.
How did you come across him?
I mean, I can take you way back. I turned 18 in 1999, November 1999.
.com mania.
Yeah, well, I was just about to say, I opened up my first brokerage account. I couldn't wait in March of 2000.
And it crashed that month.
That was peak mania. And I opened up my stock market account in that month. Now, thank God I hadn't entered the market before the bottom fell out. So I saw the bottom. I mean, I had a couple $1,000 that I put in there that I'd saved up. I saw the bottom fall out before I got in. This was highly impressionable to me. This was March of 2000. I ended up going to school. I went to Pace University and then I went to NYU. I just watched the market go down. This seemed like every day, just blood on the floors. And that was my first contact with the market when I really felt vested. And I sat on the sidelines. It's crazy. So I entered a stock picking competition, a virtual one, when I was a freshman in college. We could only go long. I thought that that was absolutely crazy. I said, why in the hell would I try to pick stocks that are going to go up when I've been watching the market only go down for the last 7 or 8 months? I think that the NASDAQ ended up having a 77% decline over 2 years or something like that. And we're smack dab in the middle of it, right? I started to sense there's a clear downtrend right here. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that. So I petitioned. This was with the New York Society of Securities Analysts, I believe, some kind of a group that I was in for the summer. And I went to the director and I said, listen, I need to be allowed to short some stocks. This is not reality that, you can only buy. I want to be able to short. And I make a long story short, I petitioned them to change the rules to allow me to short a stock on paper. And I ended up shorting WorldCom and winning that little thing. It was so funny to me just to see the mindset of, and it hadn't even crossed anybody's mind that we would do anything other than buy the stocks. Right then, it's a highly impressionable time in my life. So, I mean, I know you've asked on the podcast, can you imagine the market being down 50 to 75% over the next couple of years? The answer for me is yes, because that's my first contact with the market, was seeing that happen. Now, if you have stop losses in, hopefully that would never happen to you. And that's very real to me because that's the very first thing I think of is me as an 18, 19-year-old college kid watching the market go down every day.
An 18-year-old kid today doesn't have any of that.
Not yet. Yeah.
Not yet, right.
Not yet. It was clear to me that there's something more going on in the markets than just doing your research, in quotes. Just do your research, fundamental analysis. I was an undergrad finance major, and it's what I was taught. You're really smart. You just learn as much as you can about a stock, and the smart guys win. There's like this cognitive dissonance because what I was seeing in the market was just not matching up with what they were telling me in school or what I was listening to on CNBC. I think I intuited, certainly some of the philosophies behind trend following, but also just there's something about human behavior at that time in my life. And I started connecting the dots and seeing it in other places. I saw mimetic behavior in relationships where some guy I admire really wants to be with a certain girl, and all of a sudden, she just became a lot more attractive to me, right? That's mimetic desire working. We normally don't like to admit that other people have that kind of an influence on us, but they do. The reason that mimetic desire is such a powerful concept is that it's really explains the world. It's universal. It doesn't matter what market you're trading. It doesn't even matter what domain of life that you're in. If Girard, who's the grandfather of this idea, is correct, then you'll see mimetic behavior all over the place. And this really didn't hit. I don't think I learned about him until I was in my early to mid 30s. I'd been in Silicon Valley. I'd been through several startups, some successes, some total blowups, and then seeing this at work in myself and wondering, how do we break out of these cycles of passion followed by disillusionment?
You make me think of a situation in my existence. Back in grad school, I was in London for a semester. A bunch of Americans were hanging out. And I had a friend, no romantic entanglements with her. I guess I probably wished, but there were none. And she was a striking 5'7", 5'8" blonde lady from Florida who just looked like Pam Anderson Jr. I don't know. And we were just buddies and we hung out all the time. But all of a sudden, I realized that all of the other women in this group assumed I was with her. I wasn't, but they assumed I was with her. Oh my God, that was such an eye-opener. All of a sudden, I was now Brad Pitt. I mean, it was like amazing.
Yeah.
It was amazing. I was like, wow, this is a really interesting situation. And I guess, as you define it now, that was mimetic desire going on. Those girls didn't have anything. The other ladies had no desire in me at all until they thought, well, hold on. The tall blonde lady seems to like him. Well, we must like him too.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's why this concept of a wing woman works through mimetic desire. If you're anywhere, there's a lot of movies and comedies that do this. If you're anywhere with an attractive woman who seems like she's into you, it could be your sister, it could be your cousin. It doesn't matter. What that does to your mimetic value in other people's eyes is phenomenal.
Give me a little background here. You've had a lot of interesting conversations about this topic with very accomplished, well-known individuals. Share with me, I think it's kind of a cool story. You talk about it in your book. Share with me some of your interactions with Peter Thiel. I find Peter a really interesting guy. I've not met him. I've not yet asked him on this show. I should one day. I don't know how much media he does. He doesn't need to do anything. He is a really damn clear thinker. Loved his book, but just a really, really clear thinker. Tell me the story. Tell me how you guys connected.
Yeah, his book 0 to 1, by the way, is thoroughly imbued with Rene Girard and mimetic desire. It's kind of all about that. He just doesn't mention it explicitly. And the reason he didn't is he just wanted people to see these things for themselves without getting too much into the philosophy, which I did. I thought it was important that people know where some of these ideas come from. But that book is thoroughly about the same thing that my book is about. So Peter Thiel was a student of Rene Girard while he was an undergrad at Stanford. Peter Thiel was a philosophy major at Stanford. Never took Girard's classes. He taught in the literature and language department at Stanford, but had just heard about him through the grapevine while he was there and ended up befriending him and taking part in some little lunches and circles that this professor organized, and learned about the concept of mimetic desire while he was there, and realized that, at first he was very skeptical. He's like, wow, could it really be that imitation drives this much of human behavior? So like a lot of people that hear about this, they're a little skeptical, or they think it's just obvious. And if you think it's obvious, you actually don't really understand it and all of the different ways that it plays out. And Peter would tell you, it takes a couple of years for most people to really understand the different implications of this in our society, in economics, in politics. Peter said it took him a long time to kind of work through this. But by the time that he did, he'd already had success at PayPal. I think it's an interesting chat because we get into some things he didn't talk about in 0 to 1. One of the more interesting parts of that conversation was, he talked about his investment in Facebook. He was the first outside investor in the company. It always seems in hindsight to seem like an easy decision. Well, home run. Why wouldn't you invest in Facebook? But it wasn't obvious at the time that it was a good investment. And he invested $500,000 in Facebook. And just that investment alone was worth over $1 billion by the time that he exited. But he said, sometimes you want to bet on mimesis. That's what he told me. So he saw Facebook as being sort of an instrument of mimetic desire, just spreading it by contagion. Right? I know your friends is on Facebook, you want to be on Facebook. People post selfies on Facebook. It just kind of spreads this mimetic desire, and he saw that.
It's a really interesting perspective. It makes me think, because everyone kind of knows the story, but you start with Harvard, it expands out, et cetera. You don't necessarily think about the exact motivation for why. When you say it like that, it makes me realize, okay, Thiel had enough insights to look at it and say, well, I don't know necessarily if this thing's going to be a big winner or whatever, but clearly everyone's going to want to do it because of mimetic desire.
Exactly. And I think sometimes you can bet on mimesis without knowing a whole lot about whatever the underlying thing is. Peter Thiel knew that human behavior is highly mimetic, and he saw that here was a technology that would exacerbate and maximize mimetic behavior. In one of his interviews, not with me, he said something like Facebook is doubly mimetic because it's a platform by which you talk about the platform itself. It's kind of like Clubhouse right now. Most of the rooms on Clubhouse are talking about how awesome Clubhouse actually is. Talk about a mimetic tool. I don't know if you're on it, but for me, it's just been fascinating to see. It's kind of like a similar dynamic. It's like this super mimetic instrument. And he just bet on that. When I think about a lot of what you've written, Michael, it's like sometimes you can just bet on mimesis and you don't even have to know a hell of a lot about the stock, for instance.
Well, what's interesting about the point you just made about this Clubhouse, I've not been there yet, but okay, Facebook is the granddaddy. Twitter comes along. I guess people are doing something on LinkedIn. I don't know what. I just get friend requests there. I never go in there. So you got a couple of these big players at the top of the heap, but it sure seems like, okay, is there going to ever be a mimesis at the scale of a Facebook or a Twitter again? Maybe if we get so segregated in terms of politics, maybe there'll be left-wing and right-wing versions of it. It's interesting because, I mean, okay, I can bet on mimesis for Facebook, but is there really going to be a mimesis, a big one that can possibly unfold with a Clubhouse? I mean, it seems like Clubhouse is a derivative of winner, winner, chicken dinner, what Zuckerberg did. I mean, I don't think it's ever going to, no matter what it is, it's never going to have the size and scale. It just seems like the soup of the week.
It does. Part of me thinks that the mimesis is not going to lessen. It just kind of gravitates to other places. I mean, maybe it's gravitating a little bit into Bitcoin. It's kind of like the first law of thermodynamics, right? Like energy is not created or destroyed. Sometimes I feel that way about mimetic desire. Facebook seems to be petering out. Like most of the people I know that are on Facebook are a little older and they've just gravitated towards other platforms. So no, maybe it won't be in quite the size and scale, but I don't think that this is going anywhere. Mimetic desire has to have outlets, and I think that technology gives it outlets, right? It used to be before we had social media. Mimetic desire was kind of concentrated in your little high school or something like that. I went to a relatively small high school in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I didn't know what 500,000 other kids my age were doing at every second and every hour of the day and see the pictures that they post and what Netflix films they want to watch. I was just kind of consumed with what the kids that I sat next to at lunch were doing. In a certain sense, technology and social media has diffused this mimetic desire that we used to have, which used to be relatively confined to the kind of time and space that we were in. Now it can roam and I can see what somebody on the other side of the world wants or is doing and get into a rivalry with them. Whereas before, the only rivalries that I could get in were the kids in my grade.
One of the people that I saw say some nice comments about your work was Tyler Cohen over at George Mason University, where I went. I was not a student of Tyler's. He's been on this show. I think what's interesting about it, though, is that if I found some particular writings of Tyler's that were just some decently sounding libertarian type stuff that just makes you think, very rational, and if it was posted, I mean, he's got a way to defend himself, so he might not be a great example here. Maybe they can't cancel him. But if somebody did not have the footprint of a Tyler Cohen and walked out there into the wrong clubhouse, so to speak, and put down in front of, let's say, a group of people that are really rabid, they don't want to hear anything that messes up their worldview, and they've learned that they can use these online platforms to group together to essentially form a lynch mob. I mean, let's be frank about it. That's what it is. It's frightening that we've got to this point now. And there's no real reason for people to want to cancel somebody other than their neighbor says cancel them. And so then the other person is just like, well, shit, I want to get on board and cancel them too. And the next thing you know, you got like it's a crazy Twilight Zone episode with a bomb shelter or something where everybody's just running around with their heads chopped off just to mimic their neighbor, to mimic their friend. This is a very frightening point in history that it seems to be, especially for the United States of America.
Yeah. So, I mean, cancel culture works through this process of mimesis, and nothing is more mimetic than aggression and violence. It diverts people's guilt onto other people. And this happens in groups. It's been happening in groups since the dawn of time. The cancel culture happens through this highly mimetic process. Let's think about how it works. I talk in the book about the ancient ritual, still used in some parts of the world today, of stoning. And Girard makes the case, he asked the question, what is it about the first stone that is different than the rest of the stones? Well, the answer is that the first stone is the only one that doesn't have a model. There was no other stone that came before it. So the second stone now has a model. The third stone has two models. The fourth stone has three models, and so forth. So every single one gets easier and easier to throw. So transpose this to Me Too, to cancel culture. It's very, very easy to throw the 100th or the 1000th stone. Now we're talking about social media or the millionth stone. These things happen very, very quickly through this kind of mimetic process. And all it takes is one model to get the process starting. I will say mimesis works in a positive way too. So sometimes it only takes one model to say, no, I won't participate in this, to affect a change and go in the other direction too. So people should know that. This is not a one-way thing. It works on the upside and it works on the downside.
We haven't seen that yet, though. We've not seen yet the response to identity politics. We've not yet seen the response to cancel culture, at least not in a heavy way. I mean, as an outside observer, it appears like to me that these mindsets have been festering and building on college campuses for a long time. You do a fantastic job of explaining the mimetic part of this and why it's happening. Can that also be used to explain the idea that the professors at the assorted universities are looking at each other to try and ramp up and outdo what the one person has done? The one person says, well, we shouldn't use this word. Then the other person says, well, not that word and this word. And then not only can you not use these words, you have to use those words. And now you have to refer to me by these words. Is that kind of the whole process unfolding like that as well?
I think so. Mimetic desire always escalates. So that it doesn't matter if we're talking about price action, stocks, if we're talking about rivalries and relationships, there's always an element of escalation. One of the ways I think this plays out within academia is kind of a cult of innovation, is the way that I would say it, where in order to stand out, you have to have this different and wacky idea. And there's sort of like a competition to find who can have the one that seems like the strangest and the furthest out there. Basically, we're seeing competitions around that. If you talk about things that aren't shocking, nobody notices. So I think there's a reactionary impulse right now. I don't really know where it ends with some of the language games and some of the increasingly bizarre things that we're seeing.
It ends with a fight, and it will start as a verbal fight, and it will end as a physical fight. What other choices are there? Because at some point in time, if people are pushed, look, most people are just out there doing their own thing. They're just working, living, whatever. But if all of a sudden, here's an example, young couple, let's say they're 40 years old. They've now got a teen daughter. She happens to be in the state of Connecticut. She happens to be a good runner. She's trying to get a scholarship. Next thing you know, two young guys now say, hey, we've had some identity issues and we want to switch. Now, listen, I'm not being a jerk here. I know on the margins, there are people that have legitimate issues and there needs to be some understanding there. I get it. But the idea that we can now take just 16, 17-year-old boys that now say they're girls, and now they're in the race beating out the young girl who actually is still biologically a girl to take her scholarship, man, I mean, that's going to cause violence. That's going to cause, if that happens on a wide enough scale, that thing, and that's just one example, a lot more of that kind of stuff. And I'm not trying to be political here, but I think, look, I just saw a clip last night from Bill Maher and Megyn Kelly. Bill Maher's a lefty libertarian. Megyn Kelly is a middle-of-the-road GOP. And they were saying the exact same thing that I just said. At some point in time, we can push people too far on some of these issues, and they're going to snap.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. If I had an answer to cancel culture, to scapegoating, I'd either be the president or I'd be a billionaire right now. I don't. I do know that there needs to be some form of de-escalation, because I think you're right. In the absence of serious dialogue, if we cannot talk to each other and just stand shoulder to shoulder instead of face to face, in a sense, just seeking the same truth. I mean, that's what dialogue should be about. Hey, let's just sit here together, Michael, on this podcast. Let's just try to get to some truth. Let's just try to, if we can't do that in the absence of that, then I totally agree. It always results in some form of conflict when we no longer have language and truth and dialogue to de-escalate. Where else do we go? I completely agree.
There's got to be a side of you, as I start to lay out that scenario, there has to be a side of you that starts to feel like, oh my gosh, I hope Mike doesn't cross a line because everything escalates so fast. Maybe it would be news or something. And I'm thinking the same thing as I'm saying it. I don't want to say the wrong word because I don't want somebody to lose their marbles. And so here you and I are having a conversation, and we both know that we can't honestly say what we think because we're in cancel culture.
You could probably pitch me on moving to Southeast Asia. There's so much going on. I think that really just to look at the amount of confusion that some people have about what they're supposed to do, what's the right thing to do. I have students and friends that told me quite literally that after the George Floyd murder, they were confused about whether or not to put up a all black page on their Instagram. And they literally didn't know whether putting it up meant that they were not racist, that they were anti-racist, or if it meant that they were racist. There was literally confusion about what to do. And I think when we get into that kind of incoherence and confusion about what one can or cannot do or say, these are savvy social media people, then we've got to a place where everybody has to look to their right and their left and is paranoid and lives in this escalated state of anxiety at all times. And that's a pretty miserable place to live and way to live. You know, if it's that hard for those people, I mean, I'm barely use Instagram. Imagine what it's like for a lot of other people that are not quite as clued in, tapped into, and it changes practically daily, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. It's hard to keep up.
At that level of incoherence, I start to think back to a historical event in my youth that took place in Guyana. And, you know, there's the phrase drink the Kool-Aid comes from somewhere. Unfortunately, a mass murder, a mass suicide took place because there was one crazy guy who convinced all these people of something. There's another great example of mimetic desire. I really think when people are as incoherent as you just described, I mean, there's a side of me that viscerally feels just like, wow, there are people in Luke's life, young people in his life, that were looking at that situation last summer. And then on their social media account, they're worried, they're confused. I mean, as an older guy, I'm like, oh my God, it's awful to hear that. You know, we're supposed to be enlightened. We're supposed to be past all of this manic type stuff. But your work, your examples are laying clearly out that there has been zero advance in the human mind here on many of these issues. Zero.
I don't believe in this idea of constant progress, kind of like the stock market only goes up. I don't think that ideas only move forward. I think that it's very easy and possible to regress in the realm of ideas, in politics, in philosophy. You know, we forgot things that people that lived 2,500 years ago knew, right? How to build certain things, certain truths. We've simply forgotten them. I do think that part of this is due to some kind of a mediated reality that we're living in, right? It's mediated through this performative culture that we live in, where you have to show everybody what you're doing at all times. So it's like an extra layer that comes between me and the truth and the reality. I mean, I remember being at St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome at midnight mass 5 or 6 years ago, and the Pope was walking within 9 or 10 feet of people. And I looked around me. I mean, it's the first time I'd ever seen him in my life. Every single person at St. Peter's had their phone out and they were viewing him through the lens of their smartphone. And he was just, you could almost reach out and touch him. That was eye-opening to me because I mean, that to me was like a metaphor for just the world that we live in. Everything is about signaling and mediating who we are through our smartphone, through the language that we use, right or wrong. There's this extra layer that's become extremely complicated.
Back in the day, gosh, it's been a handful of years, maybe a decade, one of the most popular videos on TED was one from a guy named Simon Sinek. And before things got very advanced in terms of presentation and whatnot on TED, Simon just gave this easel board presentation about starting with why. And I'm going to let you explain this. He gave this easel board presentation. He talked about Apple. And I really thought it was great. Probably the one TED talk that I remember the most, frankly. And people are not going to be surprised, given to where we have gone so far, you, and I want you to make the argument and explain why, you would say, instead of going Simon's direction with why, Let's start with desire. The floor is yours.
I love that talk by Simon Sinek, but I've liked it less and less as time has gone on because I think it's sort of one part of the story. It's a little bit of a hyper rationalistic view. The idea that if we just get a few people in a room, and listen, most people don't understand what their purpose is. That's a problem. We don't talk about purpose a whole lot. And one thing that that talk did is it got people and organizations thinking about what their purpose is. What are we here for? What is this all about? That's a really good thing. And I'm glad that it's happening. One thing that I think we have to be a little bit careful about is the hyper rationalistic view. I think we're far less rational than we think. And I think our desires precede what we say about them. We're wanting things long before we're able to give a reason why. And sometimes the reasons why that we give are bullshit. Sometimes the reasons we say we're doing something are accurate, but many times they're not. And I think starting to understand what we truly want is simply a step that comes before why. So starting with why, in a sense, can be a little bit illusory. There's all kinds of presuppositions that we make about why we do the things that we do. And I think an understanding of mimetic desire, the way that this works, is in a sense meta to that. It's a beginning step that I would encourage people to understand first. And the why really comes later. I mean, the why might take you the rest of your life really to understand. So the idea that we can just kind of read this book and get a few people in a room, go through a workshop for half of a day, and all of a sudden we've landed on our organizational why or a personal why. I'm a little bit skeptical of that. And one of the fruits of that movement is that every company in the world, I don't care if they sell potato chips or whatever else, they have this like grandiose why. Here's our purpose and here's what we do. I was in my local bodega the other day and I saw purpose, some kind of a product called Purpose Fuel. I don't even know what it was, but it was fuel for your purpose.
Probably urine or something. I mean, literally.
Yeah, something like that. That's one of the things that I think has happened with that. So, I mean, listen, I'm ambivalent to it, but I would just ask people to look a little bit deeper.
You say most people don't understand their purpose. Can we take it a step back and say most people don't have a purpose? Because if I was to outline the typical American perspective, and for my audience around the world, your perspective might not be too far from this. The perspective seems to be go to school, memorize the stuff they tell you, get out of school, get a job, find somebody that maybe you got drunk with a lot, get married, start having kids, and then apparently when you're about 40 or 50, after doing this first 20 or 30 years, you too will then magically become Peter Thiel. That's it.
Yeah.
That's apparently the mindset. Of course, the you too becoming Peter Thiel doesn't work because people don't, unless they read Peter's book, they don't know how Peter got to be Peter. Okay. The reality is all of America are going down this path that I described. And then they're getting to a place and they're waking up one day and they're like, oh shit. Again, right back to mimetic desire. Then people look around and they do think it's a zero-sum game. They look at their neighbors and they say, he's got it, I don't, let's fight over it.
Yeah, I do believe everybody has a purpose, and not in the sense that life is like a sadistic poker player that's holding these cards. There's something that you're supposed to do and you've got to figure it out. I think it's necessarily like that. You sort of co-create it. You can find it. I'd love to hear a little bit. I mean, you ended up getting into trend following. I don't think that was your idea when you were in high school. I mean, the education system is a whole nother story in and of itself. I mean, we've totally lost the telos. What is this all going for? When you're in high school, you're just told, get good grades, do well on the SATs, you can get into a good college. It just gets less and less clear what the purpose is the further and further along that you go. And no, not everybody can be Peter Thiel, but we've held up models in our society. For many people, Peter Thiel is like the devil, but everybody has models that are held up.
Let's be frank, though. Anybody that says Peter Thiel is the devil, that is just irrational lunacy, jealousy, envy, whatever. And there are people out there that probably think that. And it's unfortunate. It's transparent, too. Their motivations, their desires are transparent. They just hate because they don't have what they perceive he has.
Sure. People that do believe that, and there are many people that do, They have their own models that they aspire to. It's more confusing than ever who to emulate in our society. It used to be a little less confusing. I mean, I'm talking if you go back a few hundred years, it was the saints and it was certain people in history that were worthy of imitation. We have a lot of confusion about who is worthy of imitation in a positive sense. A lot of people would struggle to name anybody that they believe is worthy of imitation.
My guests on this podcast are worthy of imitation. I choose them carefully.
I appreciate it. Confusion about models is part of the problem, but also just having a sense of maturity and growth as we go through life, finding your own way. Not everybody can be a billionaire. I do believe everybody's purpose is to create value in the world. I mean, if you're not creating value, then what the hell are you doing?
Let me push back though. When you say most people don't understand their purpose, and you say, well, people do have a purpose. If most people go down that rote memorization path, get the good grades, trusting that when I have the good grades, there'll be a company out there to hire me, trusting I'll meet the right woman age 25 to 35. I'm speaking from a guy's perspective. Women will look at it from a women's perspective. That doesn't really afford much opportunity. Look, people are going to have to check out your background, but it doesn't afford much opportunity to find yourself if you are locking yourself into the handcuffs of the particular direction that the vast majority of people are doing.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Most people finally stop playing that game and have like a midlife crisis or something like that. I mean, young people need to start thinking early about what this is all about. Don't go through the motions, like question things.
How do they get around it, Luke? They're stuck on all these social media things. They're being told if they talk right now, I've got teenage nephews, niece, they're being told right now if they say the wrong damn thing, they're going to be canceled for the rest of their life. How does anyone do anything right now in this current environment where the fear is so ratcheted up?
Well, I don't have kids yet, but I mean, I think that parents have a strong role to play in that, in just developing critical thinking skills, a spirit of discernment in children, giving them some space. I don't know if that means totally extracting them from social media. They're probably going to use it anyway at a certain point. Developing is kind of like working out. I feel like many young people, many people in general, not just young people, they almost like lack the muscles, the internal muscles to be able to resist some of this stuff. And there's really no more important thing than you can do in a child. I mean, there's sure as hell not getting it in most schools. There are good schools out there. I know of a few, but in most cases, the schools are feeding the mimetic impulses, do X, Y, and Z, jump through these hoops. I mean, at the end of the day, you can't trust them to do it for you. So part of me is terrified of being a parent because I see what I'm up against. But it's going to be my job. I'm engaged to be married. It's going to happen pretty soon. And I hope to have kids. I do think that there are things that we can do at a young age. I mean, it's got to start really early developing those internal muscles and just making sure that they're aware of what the heck is happening inside of them when they're on social media.
I'm currently in the least obese country in the world. You're currently in the most obese country in the world. And I'm speaking statistically, not Mike Covel's personal opinion. So when you talk about a lack of muscles, we are actually being technically correct. We are talking about a physical lack of muscles. And again, how did we get to that point? How did we get to the point that when I was a 13-year-old boy, I wanted that Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue every year because there was going to be some gorgeous girl on the front cover and a couple of more of them gorgeous in the front and the inside pages. And those gals, gosh, I couldn't even say that word. See, I'm already concerned if I say the word gal that someone's going to come get me, Okay, but those ladies were of a reasonable weight. Now that whole game has changed. Now we have told everybody that the desire, if this new size is okay, even though every medical professional would say, well, gosh, actually obesity is not something to shoot for. How did we get to the point to where obesity could be accepted and actually panned off as something that we should admire and think is beauty? Mimetic desire is the only way.
Yeah. Michael, I got to tell you, I came on here expecting to talk about the market and things like that. And I love where we've went with this conversation.
Do I scare you?
No. For anybody interested in diving deeper in the topic, because you mentioned obesity and body image and all of these things, Michael, one of the most fascinating books that Rene Girard wrote is about anorexia. And he kind of departs from the clinical diagnosis of this. and he views it through the lens of mimetic desire, meaning somebody who's suffering from anorexia, in a certain sense, their mimetic desire to look or be a certain way is so powerful that it overrides even their biological need to eat. So, in a certain sense, needs are no match for desires. And Gerard, it's a fascinating little booklet. It's only like 80 pages long. For some people, that might be a great entry point into this topic. Since we're talking about the issue, I recommend it. I mean, that shows the power of mimetic desire. That's not to dismiss the very real psychological things that are going on. It's only to show a different side of it.
The reason, and maybe you didn't know this, and that's quite okay. Back in the day, I did my first couple of years of this podcast. It was all trading stuff. And after a while, I was like, well, gosh, I need to get some other stuff going on here. And I convinced Dan Ariely and Daniel Kahneman to come on. So I shifted gears a long time ago. And so I'm quite comfortable going down any topic area, especially as something like this. I've got some opinions and I like to have people like you on and bounce things around with. To me, this is frightening. And I think you have laid out a foundation for us to think philosophically what's happening to us. But if we, and I'm not convinced we can, I'm more convinced that we have to find a bottom or some kind of conflict to then perhaps reset. And then again, even if we do get to this bottom or this conflict and then reset, unfortunately, there's not a lot of evidence that resets necessarily are going to be better or are possible. I mean, America was a unique experiment, and people can say, well, you know, we've got the aberration or the, aberration is not the right word. We have the awful occurrence of slavery in America, but there are the foundations, the written foundations, what we aspire to be in America is quite noteworthy and positive. There's never perfection in terms of how things are carried out, and things were not perfectly carried out in America. But if we reach the point to where we destroy America because that there were wrongs in America, which seems to be the direction we're headed, and again, your work lays out, frankly, why we're doing it, why we are going down this path of destruction. It's absolutely a mimetic desire. But if we go that direction, gosh, you know, if we get too far, who knows what's going to be the end result?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the conversation that we just had because it's so rare. I mean, the conversation that we're having is very few people that I'm able to have this kind of a conversation with. I mean, certainly publicly and on a podcast.
Do they run or what do they do?
I don't know. The thing that's fascinating is that mimetic desire is universal. So it sort of manifests itself differently in different places. It's manifesting itself one way in the US right now. Very lucky. I mean, the foreign rights have just been sold to Vietnam, China, and Japan. And I have a feeling that hopefully this concept resonates in Asia because I think it manifests itself very differently in other places. I mean, you see what's happening in Japan right now with suicide and depression. And I think that's also connected to this. We're seeing it play out in a certain way in the US. There's a lot of rivalry involved, and I certainly don't have a solution.
It's quite fascinating. To speak to Vietnam for a second, I think when you're in a homogenous culture where most people not only have similar physical characteristics, but a similar, often identical mindset, frankly, it's quite enjoyable. There's far less conflict in an environment like that. So I think America always likes to say that diversity is its strength. I hope that's going to be true in the future. I don't know if we can say it's true right now. It sure seems like diversity is pulling America apart.
I think there's confusion about diversity and equality and sameness, because equality and sameness are two different things. And I think we're really getting that a little bit mixed up right now. So many people want answers. They want to be told what to do. Here's the solution. Follow these 5 steps, and we're going to solve this problem of runaway mimesis and rivalry and scapegoating and cancel culture. That's certainly not what I wanted to do. I wanted to just simply say, here's this thing that's real, and I hope that you see it because it's playing out in all different kinds of ways in our culture. It's up to you to figure out what to do with this information, with mimetic desire, whether that comes to the way that you invest or simply the way that you think about politics or social media. So often we want a roadmap, but part of the fun is actually learning something new and then applying it in your own life, in your own country, in your own circumstances in the way that maybe only you can.
The book, Wanting, The Power of Mimetic Desire in Everyday Life. Look, I've taken you around the maypole, so to speak, but you do a very thoughtful, deep dive into these subjects. So it really it's something people should check out. We've only brought people in from a cursory perspective to let people understand some of the basic thinking here. And you are right. It does explain in my world often perhaps why back in the 1600s, a tulip bulb was selling for the price of a house in Holland. The trick, though, is even if one looks at a situation and says, well, gosh, I can see mimetic desire in the markets, you still need to have a situation to buy and sell. What's the trigger to buy and sell, and how much do you bet, et cetera? Because mimetic desire perhaps gives us a philosophical foundation to believe in something like trend following. By itself, you would need more to actually have a working system. But I love the idea that you've put together a different way to think about all of these issues, especially in my world with markets.
Yeah, I mean, you can know about mimetic desire, but you still need a strategy, not only for investing, but a strategy for your life and for how you're going to deal with this.
Hey, Luke, cool stuff. Is there a website you want to direct people to? The book will be on Amazon and all that kind of fun stuff, but is there a website you want to direct people to?
Sure. Yeah. The books, wherever you like to buy your books, check out lukeburgis.com. I write quite a bit. I mean, 55,000 words didn't make it into the book. So I put out a free Substack. Please consider subscribing to that, and you'll get a deep dive outside of just buying the book.
55,000 words did not make the book. What was the word count on the book?
Well, it's about 85,000 after that cut. The book only scratches the surface. So not only did this conversation scratch the surface, the book is meant to be simply an introduction to a fundamental concept that explains so much about the world. I plan weekly for the next couple of years to be diving into very specific themes like we did today through my newsletter and through other ways.
I salute you for going over 80,000 words. I have a book over 80,000 words. I have a book over 220,000 words. Do you realize today that most publishers and whatnot are actually thinking that a typical business book should be 40 to 50,000 words? I always thought 80,000 words was the minimum. Apparently it's shifted in the last 10 years that, 40 or 50,000 words almost feels like a pamphlet. I'm not sure again, we can find mimetic desire everywhere we look.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure they were entirely happy with me about the length that the book ended up. But I stood my ground in a couple of things, right? I mean, it's anti-mimetic in a way. I don't want to dumb things down. Some of the best stuff out there is not going to be easy. It's going to be hard to read, and it's going to be longer. And I'm basically betting that people are going to, hopefully, maybe through a little bit of mimesis, right? That people are going to be willing to make the investment to get through it.
Cool stuff. Hopefully we can chat again in the future. I'm sure there'll be a second, third book. Is this your first book?
It is, yeah.
Well, once you go down the path of one, usually number 2, 3, et cetera, happens. That's just, I don't know, it seems to be the process. So you're stuck. Number 2 is on the way. You probably don't even know when, right? But it's coming. Trust me.
I already have the desire to write it. No doubt about it.
Hey, Luke, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Michael. It's been fun. Thank you.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.